Echoes of Gunfire in America. A reflection on a wounded nation. The lake was still that afternoon, but Janice's mind wasn't. The world felt heavy again. Another shooting, this time a school she'd never heard of until tragedy painted its name across every screen. She used to flinch at the headlines. Now, they just sat on her chest like a familiar bruise. She stared at the water and wondered what had gone so wrong. Kids killing kids. Teenagers carrying grief too large for their small frames. She didn't understand how it had become normal to wake up to horror before coffee. Welcome to African Stories by Asoda, the Cynic Driver's YouTube channel. Where are you watching from? The sound of gunfire has become a grim echo in America's collective memory. Schools, malls, workplaces turned into scenes of heartbreak and confusion. Behind every headline are shattered families, unanswered questions, and a nation struggling to understand why its children are hurting enough to harm. Amid this growing sorrow sits Janice, a weary rideshare driver who pauses one afternoon by a quiet lake. As the water ripples before her, so do her thoughts, raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. She isn't a policymaker or a journalist. She's an observer of life, carrying the stories of strangers in her car and the weight of a nation on her heart. Through her inner monologue, Janice wrestles with the question that haunts so many. How did we get here, and what can we still do to stop the hurt before it becomes horror? Before we dive into the story, we encourage you to rate the video and tell us in the comments below where you are watching from. Like, share and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video coming up. She thought about the young passengers she drove every day. High schoolers slouched in the back seat, earbuds in, scrolling endlessly. Some smiled when she spoke, most didn't. They were polite but hollow-eyed, like they were already carrying invisible weights. Janice sometimes wanted to ask, "Are you okay?" But she knew the look she'd get, a shrug, maybe a smirk. Still, she couldn't stop wondering what silence was hiding behind those headphones. There was one boy she remembered. Quiet, pale, always looking out the window. He'd asked her once if people ever really changed, or if they just pretended to. She'd said, "I think people can change if someone believes they can." He didn't respond, just nodded like he wanted to believe her but couldn't. A few weeks later, she saw his name on the news. The kind of story you never forget. That was the night Janice parked a car by this same lake and cried for a boy she barely knew. It wasn't evil, she thought. It was pain. Deep, aching, unspoken pain. Somewhere along the way, people had stopped noticing the lonely ones until they became dangerous. Maybe that's what scared her most. We see warning signs, but we explain them away. He's just shy. She's moody. We wait until pain turns into violence before we care. When she was growing up, you could have a bad day without the whole world watching. You could disappear into the woods, cry, come home when it got dark. Now every hurt, every mistake, every rumor was broadcast. Social media made cruelty easy, distance safe, empathy optional. Janice didn't blame the internet for everything, but she knew it magnified every wound. She sometimes thought about parents. The ones juggling bills and exhaustion, missing the signs. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was that life left them no room to breathe. She'd seen mothers crying quietly in her back seat, fathers staring at phones instead of faces. Everyone was tired. Everyone assumed someone else would notice. But no one did. What if communities cared as much as they argued? She wondered. Schools were teaching kids equations but not emotions. Counselors stretched thin, teachers underpaid, students drowning in silence. The system waited for brokenness before offering help. By then, it was too late. Janice believed schools should be more than buildings, they should be lifelines. She imagined a world where every student had a place to belong, a club, a mentor, a reason to show up. Not everyone needed therapy, but everyone needed someone. Belonging was medicine. Loneliness was poison. Maybe shootings started not with guns, but with emptiness no one filled. She exhaled slowly. Guns. The word itself was exhausting. Janice wasn't against people's rights. She just couldn't understand how something designed to kill had become so easy to get. The kids didn't need faster access to weapons. They needed slower paths to despair. Background checks, safe storage, common sense that somehow felt controversial. Still, she knew laws were only half the answer. Laws could restrict tools, but not anger. They could delay, but not heal. Healing was human work. It happened when people noticed, listened, believed. When communities showed up before tragedy instead of after. She looked at the water and saw her reflection tremble. Maybe that's what the country looked like, distorted, trying to hold itself together. Everyone shouting about blame while the roots, loneliness, isolation, shame, kept growing underground. She thought about the teens she'd driven after fights at home. Some cried quietly, others put on armor of sarcasm. One girl had told her, "No one listens unless I scream." Those words stayed with Janice. Maybe that's what these shootings were. Screams from kids who'd never been heard. Terrible, irreversible screams. Janice wished mental health was treated like any other health. No shame, no whispers, just care. She dreamed of community clinics where therapy wasn't a luxury but a necessity. Where asking for help didn't make you broken, it made you brave. She thought about how people always said, "If you see something, say something." But maybe it should be, "If you feel something, do something." Check on the quiet kid. Talk to your neighbor. Ask twice when someone says they're fine. Caring shouldn't be rare. Janice believed in small gestures. A kind word. A genuine question. The courage to sit with someone's pain instead of fixing it. She'd seen how a little compassion could change a person's entire night. Maybe even their life. The sun was sinking now, the water turning gold, then gray. The world still hurt, but the lake was calm. Janice whispered into the wind, "We can do better." She believed it, not because she'd seen it happen, but because she needed to. Hope was her quiet rebellion. She stood, brushing sand from her jeans, feeling that same ache she always did after tragedy, a mixture of sorrow and stubborn faith. Change was slow, but it began in ordinary hearts. People like her, like you, like anyone willing to notice. As she walked back to her car, headlights flickered on in the distance, one by one. Janice thought maybe that's how healing happens. Not all at once, but in small lights refusing to go out. She started her engine, ready to drive again, not just through the city, but through the ache, through the questions, carrying one fragile truth. Compassion might not stop every bullet, but it can save a life before one is ever fired. Reflection. Janice's story is less about answers and more about awakening. It forces the reader or viewer to slow down and sit with discomfort, the ache of recognizing how easily society looks away from pain until it erupts. Through her quiet introspection, we see that violence isn't born overnight. It grows in the soil of neglect, loneliness, and silence. What makes this monologue powerful is its ordinariness. Janice isn't a politician, a teacher, or an expert. She's an everyday person, someone who sees the world from behind the steering wheel, who listens, observes, and mourns quietly. Her voice reminds us that healing won't come solely from policy or blame, but from empathy made visible in daily acts of care. The story becomes a mirror for the reader, to ask, am I noticing? Am I listening? Because in the end, Janice's reflection isn't just hers, it's ours. Moral lesson. The story teaches that compassion and awareness are powerful tools against tragedy. It reminds us that violence often grows in the shadows of loneliness, neglect, and silence, and that every small act of kindness can interrupt that cycle. Janice's reflections reveal that solving big problems begins with small, human choices. Listening when it's inconvenient, checking in when it feels awkward, caring even when it's easier not to. The moral is simple but profound. Healing begins when we choose empathy over indifference. Guns, laws, and systems matter, but the heart of prevention lies in community. Families, teachers, friends, and neighbors who notice, nurture, and never give up on one another. The story urges us to look beyond blame and toward belonging, showing that saving a life might start with something as simple as seeing the person who feels unseen. Thanks for watching. Please leave comments, like, share and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video coming up.